my parents were in a sort of like a domestic violence type relationship. Like I saw that too much, too often. Again, a lot of violence from my dad with me as well. No love or anything like that. And the effects of that, like as you're kind of growing up in that environment, which is completely unsafe, you develop these very negative core values about yourself as a person. Because you're just, as a kid, you just kind of do whatever you have to do to cope with it, right? And eventually you sort of just, you start then separating from your parents. And it's quite interesting. I'm reading a book at the moment called Hold On to Your Kids. It's by Gabor Mate and another individual. I'll have a look at that in a sec. But it's quite eye-opening. And as I was growing up, like, and I found this out, I ended up going to see a psychologist when I was 30, probably like extremely late. But, you know, I probably should have gone when I was like...
But you went.
Yeah, but I went. Yeah, I went. And it was quite revealing, like, you know, how much... I went to a psychologist because I thought there was issues with my career, like I was burnt out. And I thought, this is what's going on. And it all traced back to my childhood and these negative core values that were entrenched in me, which were that I'm not powerful and that I'm not good enough, sort of thing. And now I know, like, going through that process is that it wasn't like it had nothing to actually do with me. It was, you know, I was just born in that household and it was just the way the situation was. But growing up, I had a lot of, and then again, like, we moved to Australia when I was 16. So growing up, I tended to, when I was in Mumbai, I'd try and not be home much, you know, because if home's unsafe, you don't want to be there, basically.
Yep.
So I'd be with my friends or whatever. And I went to the same school from like kindergarten till grade 11. So I had the same peer network growing up. And then I moved, like at 16, I moved countries and I had no one, basically.
Yeah.
And then I found new friends here and they're some of my best friends today even, right? And this was 18 years ago or something like that I came here. So again, the same pattern followed. Like I just wouldn't want to be home. And that led to, you know, when you're a teenager, it leads you to do a lot of things that you shouldn't because you're influenced by your friends instead of your parents because you just don't have a good parent role model sort of thing. So, you know, I got in a bit of trouble like going through high school and stuff like that. I used to get really good grades and I just stopped trying, started skipping school, started doing stuff that you probably shouldn't. And then eventually got into the trade and went through doing that. But when I got into construction, it was kind of like I knew this is what I can be good at, right? And so it was one of those things where compared to school, I enjoyed it. And whatever effort I put in, I got out. So if I worked hard, I got promoted and things like that. So it just became a natural fit. And that just kept going up and up and up and up. And I just saw like the harder I try, I get that good feeling. I don't feel like I'm not good enough. I don't feel like I'm powerless. I didn't realize this at the time, but you know, it's just something that naturally kind of built up. And so I just kept going. But eventually, as I said, that kind of turned into an addiction because it's like you never got to a point where you were like, all right, man, this is cool. Like I can, you know, this is home. I can stay here. It's like, no, I gotta keep pushing myself and achieve the next thing so I can be good enough then and things like that. But also on the side, I had this voice in my head that was always, my compass was to do the direct opposite of everything my dad turned out to be. Yeah. So, you know, I was like, I can't take time off because, you know, my dad he was just a bum. And so it was like, if I take time off, I'm going to end up like him. So that meant I worked overtime. Like it was just about work sort of thing, like, and things like that. And, you know, I didn't have a healthy relationship with alcohol myself either, which you kind of go two ways, right? Like you either just completely leave it aside or you get into it too early. And I started drinking when I was 16 and binge drinking and never really had any control until really like a few years ago, until very recently sort of thing. And there was always that element that of guilt for whatever reason that, and the fear that I look a lot like my dad, and I'm just like, one day I'm going to end up being like him. I'm just going to turn out like it's inevitable. And so I was just constantly running away from that. Going through the psychologist, like we worked on a lot of things, a lot of specific events through my childhood that were quite traumatic. And it was quite interesting. The way she did it was, she did this thing called EMDR, which is like eye movement. It's basically something that's used for PTSD and stuff like that. And that's what I had. Like I have night terrors and all that sort of stuff as well. And going back into my childhood memories, like she basically helped me replace my image as a child with my image as an adult. Like with my, like I could see my hands on my adult size hands and stuff. So it changed how that memory worked against me, to me just going in there and be like, I can handle the situation because I'm a big guy now. And that helped quite, like I couldn't believe how much that changed my internal dialogue, because every time there'd be a stressful event in life or whatever, like I would react, out of fear, like most people do. Like even if it's anger, it's usually starts with fear. And you go back to your inner child and what your inner child's feeling instead of and it'd always be an overreaction. And that was particularly hard, like through COVID and stuff, because everyone was just, it was a period of high anxiety and stuff like that. But I was glad that I'd started seeing a psychologist before the COVID period to go through all that sort of stuff. And so in terms of timing, by the time Max was born, I had dealt with all these issues. I had kind of dealt with my past and uncovered it in a way where I'd never really attempted to even go there. Like it's, when something's bad, you just kind of bury it and go, I'm never going to turn around and look back. I'm just going to keep moving forward. But it was important to do that, because once I fixed that, now that when I parent Max, I've got an awareness of certain things where I'm projecting my insecurities on him.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't really need to, sort of thing. And a good example of that is when he cries in the middle of the night. We eventually ended up getting a sleep consultant, things like that. But when he does that, like we were told to leave him alone, and he self-soothes and stuff, and it definitely works. Like I 100% agree with it. But in that moment, like when he's crying and he's calling out dada and mama and stuff like that, my instinct was just to go and pick him up, because going back, although I knew like he needs to go through this to learn, it kept going back to me thinking of myself as a kid. It's like, I wish there was someone there to kind of come pick me up, so I'm a lot more aware of how I react when I'm under stress now, and why that's coming from my past. So I don't project that onto it and try and stay out of it, sort of thing.
That is phenomenal.
It's made a pretty,
Yeah, it takes a lot of work to get to that point. I, applaud you for pushing through that and doing that. Cause I talked to a lot of people about a lot of people have heard it. You're either running from something or you're running towards something, right? And oftentimes, if we have some sort of childhood trauma, or whatever you see in your parents, there's that image of like a child being abused by the dad, and then the child grows up and it goes around the circle, and then that dad now is abusing the child, and then grows up and it's just like this circle of crap. Unless you're somebody like yourself who is strong-willed, strong-minded, realizes what's going on and runs away from that. That can also be unhealthy, but you figured out how to take that running away to facing it and realizing what it is. I think it was Dr. Kelly Flanagan, if I recall correctly, was at a GoBundance event last year. And he was talking about that same thing you were just saying about the inner child, right? That fear of going back into, those fears, and that those reactions are oftentimes just your inner child, your childhood needing to be, forgiven or, apologized to, like that type of thing. And so when you were saying that, I was like, man, this is like exactly like what Dr. Flanagan had talked about. It was really cool to kind of hear, and putting that perspective on it. I really, that's impressive. How much time would you say that it took, or like to really start to like tear down those previous images and put in, a more positive self-image to I call it usually like a wireframe. Like you have a wireframe that your brain always goes back to. Just like anytime there's hurt or there's pain or there's whatever, and it's time to react to something, you go back to a wireframe and you move forward. But sometimes you have to tear that wireframe down and build a new one. How long do you think it took you to kind of tear that wireframe down and build that one that you can relate to now?
Well, I guess my journey with the whole self-awareness and self-reflection would have started around 2015 is when I started journaling. So I heard on the Tim Ferriss podcast about how he journals and things like that. And I was like, yeah, I'll try this out.